Welcome to History with Humphreys and Reed, a new YouTube channel with me, military historian Paul Reed.
And with me, Dr. Victoria Humphreys.
Well, Victoria, another YouTube history channel. What can we possibly say that hasn't already been said before, we might ask?
We might. I think, well, one of the things I'm interested in this for is bringing quieter stories to people. I've always been interested in people's stories, the stories that haven't got the fanfare, the quieter stories. And even if we take a story that everybody thinks they know, my intention is that we will find aspects of that story that perhaps people don't know. So I would say the kind of overlooked stories, that's what I hope we bring with this history channel.
And history is about perspective, isn't it? And different perspectives. It's not just the big battles and the great commanders and the kings, the queens, and everybody else. It's about ordinary people in these extraordinary circumstances that, particularly in the 20th century, we've seen a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really been interested in guns and tactics and strategic perspectives and all of those things. And there are plenty of people that are, and that's fine, and I respect that. But what I'm interested in is that person that's come from the small village that's gone to war and has suffered something traumatizing or something spectacular. In a war perspective, and that story gets kind of buried. And there are all kinds of stories out there. I think World War II can be talked about forevermore. And so I'm just hopeful that we'll be able to bring some of those stories to people.
And of course, I'm a military historian. You've written 2 novels on the Second World War, but we're not just going to be talking about military history, the history of warfare. And even when we are, as you've hinted at, we're going to be looking at some of the micro detail of subjects that people don't really think about.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the novels that I have in my mind, the opening scene for me has always been a vasectomy. And this vasectomy
Ouch.
happens in the 50s. Exactly, it happens in the 50s. Now, I have one of my best friends is a medical doctor, and she could probably talk me through the process of vasectomy. I have actually asked her to do that, but it won't be correct. And one of the things I found on Twitter is that there is a historian of vasectomy. So it's kind of, I'm open to any history. Come on to our channel and talk about the history of vasectomy, because I'll be interested in it. That's for sure.
Well, absolutely. And I think when you look at any aspect of history, it's not just heroes, is it? It's not just entitled people doing things. History is dirty, grimy, grubby. It involves a lot of sex, because that's the nature of human beings.
Yeah.
And all of that is an important aspect of history to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite essays that I ever wrote for my MA was on syphilis and sexual diseases. So again, I read a great book called The Pox. And there was so much to say about it, and I had to go back to I think it was the 14th century. So yeah, there are so many facets to history. So rather than say, well, we're talking about World War I or we're talking about World War II, yes, we're interested in stories from those periods of history, but we are interested in all history of all time. So quite happy to have somebody come on and talk to us about the dinosaurs, just anything, Paul. I mean, it's all interesting, isn't it? What do you think?
It is, yeah. And I think that to go underneath the kind of the bonnet of history, beyond these kind of big stories, actually, when you look at what appears to be something quite small, it has resonance in a much, much bigger picture. I mean, we're going to be talking to someone about lost art and the Nazis' acquisition of personal possessions and so on, from family spoons through to paintings by famous artists. And you'd think at one end, the kind of the painting is the big story, but often grandmother's spoons that have been in the family for generations is just as important. And it helps us tell these human stories of the 20th century and indeed other periods.
Yeah, and I think, with that particular story that we're going to tell, with the help of the Lemley family, what we're showing is that, when we think about, say, Nazi looting, plundering of art, we think about these very wealthy families in general. But when we look at the Lemley family, we're seeing sort of a more kind of, maybe a family that we can relate to. And we're seeing the erosion of their identity with the taking of those objects. So it isn't just about the loss of value of objects, it's about the loss and erosion of identity. And as we know, sometimes that actually means losing your identity in certain cases as a Jewish person, not understanding that you even come from a Jewish family, because you've lost that sense of identity because of that kind of that plundering. So it's not just about plundering of objects, it's plundering of identity, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's ordinary objects and even photographs, really. You know,
Yeah.
my lost Jewish ancestors who disappeared in France in the Second World War. I have no idea what they look like, probably because every possession of theirs was burnt, destroyed, recycled, whatever, and their identity almost has been erased from history as a consequence of that. So it's the small things that help tell us the bigger picture.
Well, certainly, I mean, photographs, it reminds me of an article that I had published where, you know, I made that kind of position clear that it's through the face that we are recognized. So yeah, if you can't look back and see the faces of your ancestors, then in some sense you could argue that you can't actually see your entire self. That makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think this is exactly kind of what we're looking to do with this channel, and we're aiming to start in January 2023, aren't we?
Yeah. We've got a very special episode coming up. Perhaps you could say more about that, Paul.
So in that first episode that we've got coming up in January, we're going to look at the story of Major General Lethbridge, who was a career soldier famous for his entry and discovery and recording of the visit to the Hitler's bunker at the end of the Second World War. But there's so much more to his life.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point I've been trying to make, is that that's the big story, isn't it? That Major General Lethbridge was responsible for proving that Hitler died in the bunker. And that's the story that we could be said to be familiar with. But there's so much more to Major Lethbridge's life and career. This is somebody who fought in the Boer War, the First World War, and the Second World War. And, you know, don't forget, he died 1 year after retirement. So his entire life was spent as a soldier. And, you know, I think it's doing him dishonor if we only think about, yes, he proved Hitler died in bunker, very important, obviously. But, you know, for the man himself and for his family, it's very, very important to look at his wider history and essentially tell that quieter story of the Boer War and the First World War that he was engaged in.
And because he's part of history himself now, we can't tell that story directly through him. But one of the things that we're going to do on the channel is bring in the relatives of these people to tell that story on that person's behalf, because we're going to have his daughter and his grandson, and they're going to give us an insight into his life and his experience.
I think we're extremely fortunate to have Nemini Lethbridge. I mean, I really do hope that we can have Nemini Lethbridge come on in her own right and talk about her law career, because she is one of the first female barristers of this country. She is famous for defending the Krays. So, you know, she has an amazing story to tell of her own. But on this occasion, yes, we're very lucky to have her to come on, because she was in Berlin with her father. She was taken to that bunker. So we're getting this excellent testimony, primary testimony from her. And then for Milo, he's going to bring some objects into the show and talk about his grandfather through those objects, because he never knew his grandfather. So it's through those objects that he's known or come to know his grandfather. And it goes back to what we were saying about the looting of objects. If those objects weren't there, perhaps that would affect his ability to understand and know his grandfather. So it's really important, and it's all kind of, these stories are all linked in some way.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we'll return to the whole idea of the power of objects throughout what we do with this. So with the launch of the channel in January, we're going to have our first recording on the 8th of January, which we'll tweet about in due course. People will be able to join us live on Zoom, and we'll send out an invitation through social media for that. And then they'll just be able to watch it here on the channel as well. And that'll something we'll repeat over the course of the coming months.
Yeah, it's really important for me that this venture is open access. So we are, you know, essentially a free channel and making free content for everybody to enjoy and participate in. So you know, I'm just really, really elated to be doing this, and also to have the guests that we're having who are also prepared to give their time freely, you know, to tell everybody their story. It's brilliant.
and we're open to offers rather for people to come along and give talks themselves or discuss the aspects of the research that they're doing, no matter what it is. And we're looking for as much diversity in history as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. So with the upcoming episode in January, you can click and subscribe through this YouTube video and on the channel, and keep an eye out on both our social media posts to see what's upcoming in 2023.
Excellent. I'm really looking forward to it, Paul.
Yep, we look forward to it. Some more history with Humphreys and Reed soon.
Bye.